The role of a good AIS system to corporate governance has only increased recently. And it seems to be the direction that without a good AIS, you really can't have good corporate governance. So this particular PowerPoint is going to be about corporate governance and the relationship between corporate governance and AIS. So to have good corporate governance, you need to have a good AIS. But the AIS also has to serve the continuing evolving role of corporate governance within corporations. And we're going to discuss that today. So what is corporate governance? What does it mean? I know in a lot of your classes, they may use the expression, but they may not define it, and it's important that we define it. We need to talk about who's involved in corporate governance because the AIS is going to be involved with these individuals to support them. And then what happened as a result of a crisis in financial reporting was Sarbanes-Oxley. And it's hard for me to believe that most of my students only exist in the Sarbanes-Oxley world. They weren't alive before Sarbanes-Oxley. To me, I have seen the difference that occurred before Sarbanes-Oxley and after Sarbanes-Oxley on corporate governance. Those of us in the profession who study corporate governance and who do research in that area, we don't call this Sarbanes-Oxley, we call it SOX. That is our expression for it. And it's related, the name comes from the individuals who are responsible for promoting the legislation that was put through Congress. It was really crisis type management to come up with this legislation. Tremendous effect on corporations. Why are we looking at corporate governance within the AIS? I just told you from the very beginning, didn't I, that it becomes important to us because of the relationship between the two. Corporate governance. There's two things I want you to know here when you look at this definition. And the phrases are efficient use of resources, and the other phrase is hold persons accountable. So the purpose of corporate governance is to promote efficient use of resources. In a previous discussion, we said that if you have a good AIS system, it's going to promote effective and efficient operations. So we can see how that AIS is going to help us in the first area. But the other area we haven't talked about too much, and that's holding people accountable. Now, there's one perspective of this that says you should have responsibility centers. That is to say that within your organization, if a particular function is to perform these tasks, then we need to have accountability for the people who are responsible and working in those areas. And sometimes this is called responsibility accounting. But we are going to take it a little bit further than that. And we are going to talk about the AIS as supporting really policing of what is happening within the organization. And this is a controversial area in that if you work in AIS, you are going to see this dimension of your job, and when you enter the workplace, it's going to be a real shock to you that a part of your role is making sure that the policies and procedures that are in place in your organization are actually followed. So you have a policing sort of function. But why do you have it? Because good corporate governance says that you have to hold people accountable. Persons are held accountable. We'll talk about the CEO and CFO and their accountability, but we also can look at this throughout the organization again. Now, this is a very broad definition: efficient use of resources and holding people accountable. But you can see that it affects things like investment decisions. What are the fixed assets you buy? When should you be buying them? When should you be replacing those fixed assets? How do you come up with the numbers that help you make the decision? And the numbers that are helping you make the decisions are coming from the AIS. What plants should stay open, which should close? Big part of this is coming from your general ledger financial reporting system, and it's doing profit and loss analysis based on those particular plants and what they contribute to the company. Preservation and growth of the company. And so in what areas should we be growing? In what areas should we be expanding our operations? And so promoting efficient use of resources and having good corporate governance really means you're helping the company become profitable. And, unfortunately, as some people might say it, a part of that is policing. A part of that is making sure that if we have ways of doing things and those ways are in place, that everyone abides by the rules that exist. So holding people accountable for following rules, that needs to exist within it. When we think of corporate governance, we think of a system of check and balances that's going to lead to good things happening for our company, profitability and growth. And another term for this is called financial discipline. So that discipline is the policing thing. We have to enforce it. We have to make sure that there are some rules to follow and that our organization is following these rules. Because when you start deviating from them, you will not be profitable and you will not grow. And this is again the hard part about being in AIS, that oftentimes people don't know about until they actually get out and take on their job. This notion of corporate governance, this notion of responsibility, and that each level holds the other level responsible for their particular functions and roles. It starts from the very top, and we call this tone at the top. So tone at the top is one of the most important aspects of, we'll talk about this later, good internal controls. And we said internal controls are a part of what the AIS does, and we'll get into the details of it later. But you need tone at the top. In other words, if you're going to have a responsible way of approaching how things are being done, and you're going to enforce those rules and those policies and procedures that exist within your organization, you have to have the support of the people who are at the top of the organization. If they set a tone that says, we are going to abide by these rules, we are going to take responsibility for these things, you're responsible for this. If they hold people responsible for it at the top of the organization and it flows down throughout the organization, then you will have a better chance of having good corporate governance. So the statement here is good corporate governance includes this idea that it all starts at the top. Top management, CEO, CFO, and the board of directors have the responsibility and take the responsibility to establish the values, behaviors that are enforced policies. So you have the policies in place and they are being enforced. And again, who are the enforcers? and the enforcers are built into the AIS system. And if you go out and you work in a business, as I did as an assistant controller, oftentimes people will try to go around the rules. They'll say, why can't I just do this? Or why can't I just do that? And they'll take it upon themselves to try to force other people to do things, not because they're bad people, not because they are immoral or they're trying to break the laws or whatever. They try to get us to go around the policies and procedures because they just want to get things done. And that's the difficulty here, because if you're in AIS, you're going to have a flow chart, you're going to have a system, you're going to have a way of getting things done, and it is your AIS, it is your baby. And when they start doing things differently, they do not abide by that flow chart. They create, in a sense, their own flow charts. And this is not something that should occur. The reason why we have these policies and procedures is we have taken care to follow the guiding principles, which you're going to learn this semester, and we have created a system that works. And so you have saboteurs, if you will, and they're not intentionally bad people who are trying to do something to cause your whole world to collapse. No, it might seem that way at times, but they aren't. They just don't understand the complete perspective of the AIS. So because there are these people, we have to have management from the top saying, we support the AIS and we support what you're doing and we're going to back you up on it. So you also have to have their support of your system, which is going to assure us that our information is going to be of good quality, which we talked about in the previous module. So we have stakeholders in corporate governance. If it's not good, these individuals will be hurt. And they are both internal and external. And the point is you have to have a balance between the interest of internal and external. You're trying to take care of both. When you're looking at external, you're talking about your investors. And those of you who know financial reporting, you know that if financial reporting is not good, if we aren't truthful, it affects stock price. And if stock price isn't good, it affects our ability to raise the funds, to finance our operations, and to grow. So the investors want a good return. They want to avoid anything like bankruptcy. They want growth in the company, right? Creditors want to be paid. Customers, when you're dealing with customers, in as far as corporate governance, they want to be sure that the quality of the product that's being produced is good. Suppliers want to know that they can rely upon you, this company, to have a long-term relationship. More and more we see these relationships between companies where, say, 90% of the sales from one company and 90% of the buying in another are in a relationship between the two. So they aren't, you're not thinking of it as a marketplace where there's multiple buyers and multiple sellers anymore. Oftentimes a supplier has such a relationship with the buyer that if that is destroyed, the buyer is no longer able to buy, maybe they're failing, then the supplier will be negatively impacted and the supplier's business may fail. So that it's no joke anymore about a supplier having really a vested interest in the good corporate governance of the company that they are supplying. Because if that company fails, they fail. And regulators, of course, regulators. including in this, I'm going to put the external auditors, the SEC, financial accounting standards. If we have a problem with corporate governance and the corporations aren't doing the things they need to be doing, then FASB will step up and FASB will say there's going to be some changes. And if you take Financial Reporting Intermediate 2, or you have taken it, you look at that chapter on leases and the complexity of that chapter in there. The reason why it's complicated is because that the corporations did not step to the plate and did not take it upon themselves to have good corporate governance. They provided misleading financials. Because the financials were misleading, you have combination of FASB and SEC involvement, which created new GAAP. So the regulators do have a vested interest in all of it. Who is PCAOB? This is called peekaboo. We call it peekaboo because they are the ones that enforce the external audit quality. Who are the stakeholders in it internally? They can be internal and external, so who's internal? There's a little controversy here. I'll talk about that. But of course, employees. They're a part or should be included in corporate governance. We said responsibility accounting, tone at the top. You start at the top of the organization and you go down. Corporation, the CEO and the CFO are responsible for all the corporation. And then below them, you may have vice presidents who are responsible for divisions. Within the divisions, you may have particular units that have their own responsibilities, and it goes down and down and down. And those are all employees, and they all become involved in that corporate governance and within the structure. At the very top, again, you have the CEO, the CFO, and you also have people working with the president in the president or vice president's office there. And then down to supervisors at the lower levels who oversee the individual employees. The next ones are controversial. Now, internal audit isn't controversial because it is inside audit, but auditors outside, we said they were on the external. Internal is actually a functioning part of the company, employees of the company, who are looking at corporate governance, making sure it's working. The controversial ones are the last two. The board of directors, who have to make sure that the interest of management, what management's doing, the CEO and CFO are doing, is aligned with what the investors would want them to do. They work with that alignment. And then the audit committee is a committee made of board of directors who are responsible for looking over the financial reporting system of the company. So the controversial ones are board of directors and that part of the board of directors. It's the audit committee. Why is it controversial in this aspect? Because here we have it as internal. Oftentimes the board of directors some of it is the CEO and CFO. The CEO and CFO also serve on the board of directors. Then where are they? Are they internal? Are they external? That's the part that's a controversial aspect of it. And the audit committee is a part of the board of directors. So do we put the board of directors as a part of the company, or do we put the board of directors on the other side? So in a sense, you could say that the board of directors and audit committee are neither internal nor external, or you could say they're both internal and external. I just don't know. In this particular presentation, we have them as internal. But overall, there is a fiduciary responsibility which exists, and fiduciary means trust. There's a trust relationship for these internal stakeholders, and that we are doing what is right by our employees, that we're being right by what is the supervisors and other employees. SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley and Corporate Governance. The focus after SOX, and I know, again, you probably don't remember that time, is on accountability, holding people accountable. And the main areas here are the quality of financial reporting, that we have internal controls over reporting. We'll discuss what internal controls is later. And these internal controls over financial reporting need to be evaluated and reevaluated. And if we have a weakness, we correct it. And basically, what I want you to understand about this is if there's a problem with the financials and the financials are not being truthful, they're not following GAAP, and this is not meaning to say that the financials are created fraudulently, because they don't even have to be created fraudulently here. We're just saying that the financials cannot be relied upon. They just can't be relied upon by the readers. When you get to this point, then you say that there is a weakness, definite weakness, that's created this problem, and it generally goes back to internal controls, that all the transactions are being in our system, and we talked about what a good AIS does. So the AIS has failed somehow, and now we have financials that are not good. What we're saying here is that management is accountable for all of this. So they need to go back and evaluate and reevaluate and see if the AIS is working, if it's not working, and they have to report on what weaknesses exist. And the level of the work that management has to do is dependent upon the size of this company. So there's different rules as to the amount of work that's going to be done, but the CEO and the CFO are going to be responsible, accountable is the way they say it, for the quality of the financial reporting. And there's penalties. They have to certify about the financials. So that's coming up on a next slide, I believe. So good corporate governance achieved when the interests of what groups are balanced. And that was on an earlier slide, internal and external. Now, Sarbanes-Oxley has caused a change in the expectation of good corporate governance. Which of the following are changes from SOX? Increased management oversight. What did we say management now has to do? They have to be responsible for financial reporting. They have to look at internal controls. They have to be able to evaluate those internal controls. So 2, internal control, reporting, and compliance. What is 3? What is financial stewardship? It means that they are now have to look at the company and they have to be responsible for how the company is doing. This is the financial stewardship. So what we say is all of the above. And the increased management oversight relates to changes in the board's role, and it also it goes along with the CEO and CFO and their requirement that they look at and sign off really on the financials. Increased internal control and compliance, we have Section 404 reporting, and Section 404 says that the AIS system has to be tested. It has to be tested. So tested means you have to look at it and you really have to make sure that it's working, that you can do something, and if it's not a policy or procedure of the company, and it's done, then it is found and it is stopped. So you have to test it. You have to test it to see if it does. So 404 is the one that requires testing. Increased financial stewardship. What does this mean? You have the audit committee. One of the big changes was this Peekaboo, and Peekaboo is the group that's again going to look at external auditors and make sure their audits are done effectively. So all of the above.